PowerHouse Texas was formed in 2022 by members of the Texas Energy and Climate Caucus, as well as some other interested folks. PowerHouse Texas is a nonpartisan nonprofit that educates and cultivates energy policy leaders through these energy innovation forums, as well as through our Energy Policy Fellowship, our Energy Policy Advisory Council, our energy tours, and more. Our energy tours are an opportunity for legislators and staff to see innovative energy technologies firsthand across the state. We've visited Houston and San Angelo, and we're currently saving the date for March 5th for the next one here in Austin to see a nuclear reactor and hydrogen generation. If you want to pre-register for information when signups open, scan the QR code on the screen. If you work in the building and want to take advantage of our programs, please talk to Patricia Zavala, our executive director, or Annika, our acting programs director. The goal of our Energy Innovation Policy Forums is to bring together academics, industry leaders, policymakers, and community leaders to explore the ins and outs of emerging energy technologies to help inform evidence-based policy solutions in Texas. A quick thank you to our sponsors and funders before we get started. We want to thank Rolls-Royce SMR for sponsoring our forum today. And we also want to thank our base of funders who make all of our work possible. So why are we here today? I know the people in this room don't need recent headlines to tell you that nuclear energy is gaining serious momentum in Texas. With rising electricity demand, increasing industrial growth, and a need for reliable around-the-clock power, state leaders are looking for solutions that ensure Texas remains an energy powerhouse. Governor Abbott has made it clear that advanced nuclear is a key part of that vision. His Advanced Nuclear Working Group recently released its recommendations in December, outlining steps to position Texas as a leader in next-generation nuclear energy. And we're already seeing movement. Just last week, Senator Tan Parker filed a bill aimed at expanding Texas's role in nuclear development. But turning policy momentum into real-world deployment won't be easy. Financing, regulatory hurdles, workforce development, and supply chain challenges all stand in the way. That's why we've brought together leading experts from policy, academia, and industry to discuss what it will take to make nuclear a reality at scale in Texas, and how we can turn today's momentum into lasting energy leadership. Okay, so here's what you can expect from our format. We're going to have an overview of advanced nuclear energy by Dr. Rusty Towell, moderated panel discussion, audience Q&A, and a wrap-up, and then we will have a networking reception after we're done. And with that, I'm going to introduce our experts. We have Thomas Gleeson, who was appointed chairman of the Public Utility Commission of Texas by Governor Greg Abbott on January 19, 2024. He previously served as the executive director of the Public Utility Commission of Texas, a position he held since December 2020. Thomas has worked for PUCT for over 15 years in various roles, including Chief Operating Officer, Director of Finance and Administration, and as a Fiscal Project Manager. Gleeson also worked as a legislative analyst for the Texas Senate and a budget analyst for the Legislative Budget Board. Next, State Senator Charles Perry was elected to the Texas Senate in 2014 after serving 2 terms in the Texas House of Representatives. Senator Perry currently chairs the Senate Committee on Water, Agriculture, and Rural Affairs and is vice chair of the Senate Committee for Health and Human Services. He also sits on the Senate Committees for Finance, State Affairs, and Transportation, and he co-chairs the State Water Implementation Fund for Texas, SWIFT, Advisory Committee, and the Texas Infrastructure Resiliency Fund. Governor Abbott appointed him to the Southwestern States Water Commission and the Western States Water Council. Fun fact, he's also a beekeeper, which I find fascinating, but he's trying to talk me out of it. Next, Dr. Rusty Towell is the founding director of ACU's Nuclear Energy Experimental Testing Lab, which is building the first university advanced nuclear reactor in the country. Rusty has a BS degree in engineering physics from Abilene Christian University, where he has been a professor for the past 23 years. He earned a PhD in nuclear physics from the University of Texas. He served in the U.S. Navy as an instructor at the Naval Nuclear Power School. His over 250 articles and scholarly writings have been cited more than 35,000 times by peer-reviewed publications. Matt, next is, Matt, I don't have your last name. There it is, Matthew MacVicar. MacVicar, I should have checked. Is Vice President of Government Relations at Rolls-Royce, where he leads U.S. federal government advocacy efforts for the company's nuclear energy and civil aerospace divisions. Prior to joining Rolls-Royce Government Relations in 2019, Matt held a series of roles spanning from jet engines for the Department of Defense to mining, with stops in Australia, Canada, and Latin America. Matt also serves on the board of directors for the Royal Aeronautical Society's Washington, D.C. branch. Recently, Matt's efforts have focused on a new objective for 2025, bringing Rolls-Royce's small modular reactor technology to the United States. And last but not least, we have moderator Matt Baddour. He covers the energy and environmental justice in Texas. Born in Houston, he's worked the business desk at the Houston Chronicle, covered the U.S.-Mexico border for international outlets, and reported for several years from Colombia for media like The Washington Post, BBC News, and The Atlantic. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Rusty Towell, Director of Next Lab, Abilene Christian University, a member of our Energy Policy Advisory Council, and an expert on nuclear energy.
My name is Jenny Dunn. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor. I work at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. In my role, I spearhead UK government energy outreach to the federal government on all things energy security, and I also head up the civil nuclear portfolio as well. So it's great to join you today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. My name is Rusty Towell. I'm a professor of engineering and physics at Abilene Christian University, and I want to talk to you about advanced nuclear in Texas. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about advanced nuclear, define some terms just to get us all on the same playing field. Then I'll talk to you a little bit about our project, which is, of course, the leading project in the state of Texas, biased point of view, 100%, and then talk about other things that are happening in the state of Texas to help advance nuclear. So a lot to say in 10 minutes. What is advanced nuclear? At the highest level, advanced nuclear is just take all the good things about nuclear energy. Thank you. It's great to be with you. My name is Rusty Towell. I'm a professor of engineering and physics at Abilene Christian University, and I want to talk to you about advanced nuclear in Texas. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about advanced nuclear, define some terms just to get us all on the same playing field. Then I'll talk to you a little bit about our project, which is, of course, the leading project in the state of Texas, biased point of view, 100%, and then talk about other things that are happening in the state of Texas to help advance nuclear. So a lot to say in 10 minutes. What is advanced nuclear? At the highest level, advanced nuclear is just take all the good things about nuclear energy, its safety record, its cleanliness, its reliability, and let's see if we can improve on a technology that's basically been stagnant for about 70 years. So let's make it safer. Let's make it cleaner. Let's make it more efficient. Let's make it multifunctional. Let's make it scalable. And let's make it with a large range of fuel choices. So let's improve upon what's already, in many cases, the very best energy source we have. When you talk about advanced reactors, people will talk lots of different language, Gen 4, Gen 3 plus, this type of reactor, that type of reactor. A lot of times people talk about molten salt, liquid metal, gas cooled, in addition to pressurized water or upgraded Gen 3 plus pressurized water reactors or boiling water reactors. What really, from a technology point of view, really what people are discussing is what is your choice of coolant? What do you use to transfer heat from where it's generated in the reactor core to where we use it in a steam generator or whatever else to produce electricity or to provide high-level industrial heat? What is your heat transfer fluid of choice? And this simple little 2x2 matrix tells us we have sort of four choices that are out there in the world. The upper right is what we use, water. It operates at very high pressure and relatively low temperature. And so that's efficient, and like I said, it's a great technology. We've been using it successfully for decades. If we would prefer, though, to move down in pressure, because if we actually move to a low pressure, it makes it safer, and you have to have fewer safety systems, so it also makes it cheaper. And so that's something like liquid metal, so sodium cooled or lead bismuth. The other direction we move on the chart is let's move to higher temperature. Water doesn't really want to stay a liquid above 100 degrees, but at crazy high pressures, you can get it up to 300 degrees. But if you want to go to really high temperature, you have to use either gas as your coolant, which isn't very effective. So you have gas cooled, which can operate at high temperature and high pressure. But if you really want to get in the sweet spot at the bottom here, where you have both the safer, cheaper, but also more efficient and be able to produce high process heat, then you need a different fluid, which is a molten salt. And that's just a salt in a liquid form, and it is allowed to operate at high temperatures but low pressure. And so you get all the advantages. The other thing that we talk a lot about when we talk about advanced reactors is small modular reactors. And so let me start by telling you what is not a modular reactor. And again, this is not a dig at Vogtle. Vogtle's in a state-of-the-art, brand newest reactor in the U.S. fleet of nuclear power plants, and it's producing lots of clean energy today for us. I'm thankful it's there. But if you ask how it was built, it took 15 years to build it. It took, at the peak, something like 9,000 workers on site to build it, and over $30 billion, depending upon accounts, maybe up to $36 or $37 billion to build. That's a lot of effort located in one spot, long period of time. That's not what we mean by small modular. When we're talking about this big thing, just the reactor vessel, when it's being shipped, it's too big to ship in normal ways, so it's built, first of all, not built in this country because it's too big. Can't be built in this country. It's built in South Korea. Came over on a ship, and then it went by rail that malfunctioned in this news article because the heavy-duty rail cart wasn't able to keep the reactor there. The pressure vessel alone weighs more than the Statue of Liberty, and so you have real problems. What is small modular reactor then? Small modular reactor just means let's build it in pieces parts in a factory. So we have factory-built modules that can be then transported to site and assembled together. So you take all the advantages of assembly line construction. So the high quality, the low cost, the faster production that you get from a factory-built, everything we learned from Henry Ford a century ago. And then you combine it with the fact that you build it, you license it once, and then you build it many times, which is also something we've never failed to do on a commercial scale in this country. Every commercial reactor separately designed, separately licensed, and lose the efficiency there. So the picture here is a picture of what we plan to do at Abilene Christian, which is build a couple modules in a factory, a skilled workforce, do all the quality control there, assemble this, transport those two modules, weld them together in place, and there's very little on-site construction. Let me say a little bit about licensing a reactor. In the United States, if you want to license a reactor, you have to get a license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It's federally regulated. It's illegal to build a reactor without a license. There's many pathways there, but the most popular pathway is sort of a two-part pathway where you get a construction permit and then you get an operating license. The NRC is required to share with us, the public, what they're doing, so anyone can go to their website. You can read through this. This is new reactors, advanced new reactors, who we're working with. And if you click there, you'll see a list of all the companies they're actually working with. But if you click one step further, applicant projects, these are the applicants that have actually submitted construction permit applications to get approvals. There's 3 groups that have submitted applications, 2 have approved them, 1 of them is in the state of Texas. And that's the project I'd like to talk to you about at Abilene Christian University. We're in Center Mass state of Texas. The mission of Abilene Christian University is to educate students for Christian service and leadership throughout the world. We've grown in size every year for the past 7 years, and we've also grown in quality, which is much more exciting to me. We're national leaders in undergraduate education and research. Next lab is the Nuclear Energy Experimental Testing Lab. That's the lab on campus that's doing this. We're powered by an industry sponsor, Natura Resources. Our goal is to meet the critical needs of the world. And what are the critical needs? We want to meet energy needs. I think everyone understands it. If you're in this room, you probably understand it. We need more energy. They're building a data center a half mile from my house that wants to have a gigawatt of power on it. We want more data. But when I think about the way energy blesses the world, I think more about this lady in the picture here, who, like 40% of the Earth's population, her energy source is some sort of biomass, in this case, dung from some sort of animal mixed with straw. Dry that in the sun, that becomes her energy source to cook her meals over, heat her home. And of course, millions of people die every year from breathing those sort of fuel sources burning in their house. Cancer, half of us will develop cancer during our lifetimes. There's great treatments for that. If we can get our hands on medical isotopes, doctors can cure and treat lots of forms of cancer. And then 1/3 of the world's population doesn't have access to pure water. So energy, medical isotopes, high process heat, pure water standing in for that. These are things the molten salt reactors can provide. So the mission of Next Lab is to provide global solutions to the world's need for energy, water, and medical isotopes by advancing the technology of molten salt reactors while educating future leaders in nuclear science and engineering. We're funded by Natura Resources. Natura Resources' mission looks a lot like Next Lab mission, except it has the additional words commercially deployable. Natura is the commercial industry that is trying to deploy this technology. and they formed a research alliance with the University of Texas, Texas A&M, Georgia Tech, and Abilene Christian University. So the 4 universities in Natura are together working to build the molten salt research reactor. It's very, very similar to the molten salt reactor experiment that was built at Oak Ridge in the 60s. And so it's known technology, it works. It was deployed, operated for 4 years in Tennessee. We would like to take many of the shared concepts, the same technology choices of reactor, moderator, fuel form. We want to simplify it, use low enriched instead of high enriched uranium, et cetera, make it safer and easier to build. We have been working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for many years. 4 years ago, we submitted our construction permit. Last year, we got it approved. 3 of the 5 commissioners have come to ACU to see the facility that's going to be deployed in, meet the team that's working on it, and they're excited to be able to do their part to help make this possible. We've answered over 300 questions as they were reviewing our construction permit. They found no significant findings in our environmental impact, and in September 16th of last year, we had the historic signing of this construction permit. It's historic because the United States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, has never licensed a liquid-fueled molten salt-cooled reactor before. We built one in the 60s at Oak Ridge, but that predates the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So this government agency has stood up to regulate reactors, and they've never licensed one of these. They did it last year. They were as excited about it. They issued this little pin I'm wearing that says Nuclear Regulatory Commission around the outside, Abilene Christian University Construction Permit Review Team. They're very proud of the work they did, and rightly so. 15,000 man-hours of almost 100 people working to get it done. At ACU, we have a lot of different research projects and labs. I'm not going to talk to you about those, but I will show you this picture to talk about workforce development. This is the team that worked last summer at ACU on this. So over 40 students, 30 faculty and staff all working together to make advanced reactors. Workforce development will be an issue. Educating next generation is important, and we're trying to help address that. This is the building that we're going to deploy this reactor in. It's our Science and Engineering Research Center at ACU. And we're proud of this building. If you do a cross-cut of it, you see what really makes the building special. We have a trench in the high bay space where we have, in this cartoon, the couple modules of the reactor, the primary fueled system, and then the secondary heat removal system. Those modules, again, being built off-site, trucked on-site by a truck, through the big roll-up door, 40-ton crane lowers it down a trench, puts a concrete lid on top of it, gives us a safe place to rapidly deploy this. The Natura Resources Research Alliance is leading the way in molten salt reactor development and deployment. ACU has received our construction permit, one of just 2 groups in the nation to have a construction permit for an advanced reactor. We'll be the very first university to have an advanced research reactor. ACU has completed the building that will house it, and so we have the facility ready, we have the license, we've started down the path of building and getting an operating license. We're on the path to be the first operating advanced reactor in the U.S., and Natura Resources is positioned to be one of the first commercial vendors capable of deploying an advanced reactor. In the state of Texas, a few things, some of these already been mentioned in the intro. Texas Advanced Nuclear Reactor Working Group from the Public Utilities Commission work on this. The report is out there, lots of good work there. There's a partnership between the Texas Produced Water Consortium at Texas Tech University, ACU, and Natura. This is actually the first planned commercial deployment of the Natura Resources commercial size reactor. And then the second one is the Texas A&M system that wants to support nuclear. They announced 4 partners they're working with, Natura Resources with them. And so Natura Resources plans to build demonstration reactor at ACU, our research reactor, and then immediately two second of a kind, 2 reactors that will be commercial, one in West Texas, part of the Texas Produced Water Consortium, one in the Relish campus at ACU. We also mentioned today is this first bill signed that's talking about what the state of Texas can do to help advance nuclear. I appreciate your attention. I look forward to Q&A and to answer questions soon.
We're about to see a real explosion of, fantastical ideas during this technological boom, but how can our lawmakers help determine what's ready for investment and what's just sort of posturing like it's ready for investment? So who would like to get started on this one?
I think you hit on the biggest subject that we face, or the biggest issue we face, because everybody likes to talk about nuclear, and everybody knows that nuclear long-term is the best play for energy market that we can have. So what I've learned is, and I've met with a bunch of nuclear people, the problem is most of their background is of the 60s. There's not a lot of, quote, new stuff. There's a lot of old stuff repackaged. And there's nothing wrong with that. We've made improvements for safety and things. So the question I now ask really early on in a conversation is, when would you be ready to go commercially? And if they're honest, they'll say somewhere between 10 and 20 years. So that's a challenge for policymakers. And so we need energy in Texas. We need a lot of it, and we need it fast. We've got natural gas that's going to triage or fill the void until we get to the next level. But you can't deny the fact that the companies that are coming here are going to need a different type of energy long term. And I think the partnership they're going to do, they're going to be customer-centric power sources, right? The AI database isn't going to wait on Texas to come in to put it in. But Texas, of all places on earth, should lead in this initiative. We're all things energy. We have the wealth, we have the ability, we have the spirit, we have the wildcatter kind of conversations that our history, our culture is part of. So Texas is really in an interesting place, because this session, possibly next session, but this session, if we do what we're asked to do from industry groups out here, and if we do what we think we should do and we know we should do, we can actually put a stake in the ground that Texas is the proving ground for these energies. Texas is going to have to decide at what level of risk is it prudent for taxpayer dollars to be risked. And I'll point to Natura. Full disclosure, they're in my district, and I'm biased, but I've been to that facility. I can do the same pitch that Dr. Towell just did, because I believe her in it. I am the lead on the Produced Water Consortium, and we do hope that the first commercially viable SMR from Natura and small molten salt technology is deployed in the Delaware Basin, where we pull up 25 million barrels of water a day. That's a legitimate water source. We just need an energy source to make it happen in the center of a oil and gas complex that needs energy just like the AI data center. So we have a real opportunity here to establish ourselves. Can I crystal ball coming out of this session what that looks like? I don't have it today. You know, the good news is it's kind of subject matter that we're talking about. But we really, to your question, policymakers need to understand fully the timeline, because our success or failure in this industry is setting expectations properly. I have one that I believe in 5 years or less will be commercially viable. That's a real deal. I have multiples that are probably 10 to 20 years out. That's a real deal. But if you come in from a policymaker, because we live in 2-year election cycles, and you get confused on what you're talking about, and you get publicly out there ahead of this curve, and you set the expectation wrong, this industry will be set back just like 3 Mile Island did. I mean, it's that fragile because you're using taxpayer dollars potentially. So here's my conversation for the legislature. At what point do we step in and are willing to partner and risk something? Well, this project's got a construction permit, one of 2 in the country. A lot of the risk has been taken off the table. A lot of the HIP nationals have funded it up to that point. So I think it's appropriate to have the conversation that that's where we can step in and feel good about. It's going to produce fruit. I don't know where we land. I don't know where we're going to do, but I think the state of Texas has a role of mitigating downside risk on concepts that are being talked about, and identify the ones that are going to come to reality sooner than most, and with some predictability. So that's where the state of Texas, I believe, is. I'm speaking for my colleagues. You should never speak for 181 other politicians. They're all type A's with no plan B personalities. So I probably just stepped on a bunch, but I believe we are in a crossroads or an inflection point to decide where do we want to be in this space. There's a lot of conversation, but in reality, there's not a lot of follow through. Texas actually could follow through, and I hope we do.
Thank you. Chair
So yeah, I think the first thing I would say, you know, I took over nuclear for the commission on January 1st when my colleague Jimmy Glotfelty resigned from the commission. I offered a seat to former Commissioner Will McAdams. He declined to come up and talk. But the first thing I learned today was I've really got to beef up my bio, because if I'm going to sit on these panels, I need my bio to say a lot more, because the work history of the folks up here is really incredible. You know, Chairman Perry spoke about this, and when I think about what the state can do, it's really around de-risking these assets. You know, last session, the legislature passed the Texas Energy Fund and showed a willingness, if the state needed, to partner with private industry to help de-risk those investments. So the pathway is there, and I think, to his point, timeline is of the essence. When the governor asked the commission to look at this, one of his requests was, we're hearing 5 to 6 to 8 to 10 years. How can we speed up that timeline? And so I think that's where, for me and my colleagues at the commission, a lot of this lies, are there things we can do from a permitting standpoint? Senator Parker's bill touches on having an authority for the state, having a single point of contact to help with permitting, which when I meet with folks, people say is one of the major issues. Siting and permitting are the two issues that really come up. So I think the bill that was filed, SB 1105, I think is a really good starting point. It takes a lot of the recommendations from the Advanced Nuclear Reactor Working Group and puts them into statute. But I think around the financing, the state can really step in like it did with the Texas Energy Fund to get thermal dispatchable gas generation in the state and use that as kind of a pathway to really help get nuclear off the ground in the state.
Thank you. Any other thoughts here about determining what technology is worthy of our money yet?
I touched on it when I spoke earlier, but you can't build it without a license. Who's asked for a license? There's a very small group who's gotten a license. It gets smaller. Doesn't mean the others can't, but I will say there's a time delay there. So you're talking about the time. It takes years to write an application, a quality application. It takes years for the NRC to review them, and the most popular path is you have to get 2 of those. So if you just think, if you haven't started yet, you can't promise. Sometimes I read headlines where there's a vendor that says we'll deploy a reactor in 2026. They haven't started an application process. That's impossible. I mean, laws can be changed. Laws of man can change, and this is the body that, one of the bodies that can do it. But I don't think it's possible to deploy something if you haven't started the licensing process that quick. And so go there. If you want to find out which projects are real, go to the NRC website.
Thank you. All right, let's talk about what it takes to actually make this happen here. Chairman Gleeson, you touched a little bit on the timeline and what the state could do to make that move a little bit faster. Wonder what other ideas we have here, and what are the big steps that are actually going to have to happen, before we can actually get close to deploying our first advanced reactor.
Can I go?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Matt MacVicar, again, Rolls-Royce. I think just real quickly, for those that aren't familiar with Rolls-Royce, so how many of you, when you hear the word Rolls-Royce, think cars? Just raise your hands. Right? So we don't make cars anymore. Those are actually made by BMW. We sold that business to BMW in the late 90s. And so what we actually make now are primarily critical power systems. So we make gas turbine engines for airplanes, including those, you probably fly on them all the time. So small planes, commuter planes for American Eagle, United Express, those kind of things where you fly hopper flights, and big planes as well. If you get on an aircraft and there's more than one aisle, more likely than not, that's a Rolls-Royce engine, including the Virgin Atlantic flights that land here in Austin on a regular basis. But we also make power generation equipment. So we purchased Detroit Diesel's off-highway business. So we are actually responsible for backing up the power of 25% of the world's data centers. So 1 in every 4 clicks on the internet is backed by a Rolls-Royce reciprocating engine. Most of those are gas-powered, and we build those in Mankato, Minnesota. But the last piece, and kind of our secret piece, is really nuclear reactors. So if you go back to just following World War II and the emergence of atomic energy and really atomic weapons, Rolls-Royce was a center point in the US and UK's mutual defense agreement. So this was the agreement that gave the UK nuclear weapons. And part of that was Eisenhower determined that the UK also needed a deployment mechanism for weapons, and the submarine was chosen. So Rolls-Royce was selected by the US government to inherit the US submarine nuclear energy technology. And so here we are, close to 60 plus years later, and Rolls-Royce over that entire cycle has been building compact, small nuclear reactors that can be managed by 18-year-olds for months at a time underwater. So our goal now is really to bring that technology above ground and bring it to the U.S., kind of bring it back home to some level. But really our approach, and we get back to kind of what makes these things real, is we looked at this problem set and said, where is the technology innovation best applied? We already have a nuclear reactor that works. We can already build it small. We already have an active production line. We're one of the few companies, if not the only company in the world, that has active compact nuclear reactor production ongoing through both the design phase through fabrication. Here in the U.S., BWXT, one of our partners, is the U.S. submarine manufacturer, but the design for those reactors actually happens in our naval labs. But we looked at this problem, we said, maybe the innovation doesn't need to be in the technology, but actually in the fabrication of these reactors. And so we set out back in 2017 on a quest to figure out how big we could build a reactor from an output standpoint, where if you break it up into little Lego pieces, as Dr. Towell was mentioning, that can be truck transportable, so not big, giant, reactor vessels that are flying, driving on trains and falling over, but little Lego pieces that can be put on the back of a semi. How big can you build it so that every single component in the power plant is that size? And so we landed at 470 megawatts. That's the reactor that we currently have today, that we are looking to deploy first in the UK. Rolls-Royce is one of 4 companies remaining in the GBN competition, which is the Great British Nuclear Competition. It's kind of the current world leader, just in terms of how risk mitigation has been built in there. So Rolls-Royce, along with GE, Hitachi, Holtec, and Westinghouse, so 3 American companies, 1 British company, are the finalists there. And we're hoping to hear a decision this year on kind of the down select. But the reason that is so important is because all those technologies had the novel kind of higher risk technologies kind of put aside. We're talking about pressurized water reactors, so slightly older technology. But the risk mitigation, what we're talking about is how can you actually finance these things so that the first of a kind can actually occur and be bankable, right? That what we know probably is going to be the case is when we build first of a kind, and what everybody's worried about is you're going to have cost overruns, right? That's absolutely a possibility, and we're not talking about 1x cost overruns. These could be substantially more than that. So, from our standpoint, we tried to do everything we could, and we feel that this is kind of the right approach, but everything we could to de-risk everything else in the process and focus on kind of delivery on schedule, and reducing any sort of risk in the fabrication piece. And so I would encourage, I'm very encouraged by the fact that the focus on permitting, site development, this is the kind of stuff that we need to fund to make this technology real and accelerated.
Could we see a Rolls-Royce reactor here in Texas anytime soon?
We absolutely could. So, you can see it on your chart. Rolls-Royce is currently 18 months ahead of the U.S. peers within the UK's version of the NRC process, the GDA process. So, our view is we will hopefully be able to kind of quickly move through the NRC process. I can announce here that we are intending this year to enter the NRC process, again, with the kind of accelerated, we've got the answers from our homework in the UK, which is a very stringent process, if not more so than the US here in the NRC. So we're planning on kind of getting our licensing in place. And the other piece that kind of sets Rolls-Royce apart, I go back to that Lego brick approach. So we're not talking about daisy chaining together little tiny reactors. We're talking about building factories, 1,000 job plus factories that will produce these little Lego modules that can be stacked together and build a reactor. And that is where we are exploring, where do we build these? Who do we partner with? What states do we engage? So recently we had a group of U.S. state delegation representatives over to the UK to see where we're actually testing the construction of these modules. Went very well. We were trying to get someone from Texas, but unfortunately, we weren't able to achieve that. But Texas absolutely is kind of a leading market, at least from the deployment perspective, and obviously with both the government surplus, great politics in this state, and a yearning for constructive growth. I think all of those things come together and make Texas a very attractive place to both deploy and build factories.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Go ahead.
So you're talking about thousands of jobs. So that makes me think of workforce development. Given Rolls-Royce's experience, I mean, is that another place that you see perhaps government stepping in is through workforce development? I assume we need more workers that are skilled to be able to do this. I assume that doesn't exist today to do this at scale. Is that the case?
I think to some level, yes. I think where we've seen a successful template, so Rolls-Royce, if you're familiar with the AUKUS agreement, that's Australia, US, UK. It was a submarine agreement to basically share submarine technology also to Australia. Rolls-Royce was selected to build the reactor for that submarine between the three countries. With that, there was an initiative in the UK and a recognition that we really need to upskill jobs. So a large apprenticeship program was started, putting through about 250 apprentices per year. So a template exists to ramp up. We have that on the defense side with submarines. It can easily be translated, I think, to building reactors for the civil fleet. But again, I think that one of the larger challenges also is going to be, can we get enough welders? Can we get enough tradesmen? Can we get enough young men and women that really understand how to put these things together on site? Those are going to be probably the more critical challenges than can we get enough nuclear engineers.
Could I just add to that? I think the US and Texas face a lot of the same challenges as the UK in this: workforce development, access to capital, the cost of capital. How do you reduce risk? I think, as Matt was saying, sort of with the small modular designs, how do you get it so we can build it at a commercial scale? Because the first one or two probably will encounter some problems and be quite expensive, but once you get to the 10th order, we should start to see those economies of scale. So I really think that is an opportunity for there to be collaboration between the state of Texas and the US generally and the UK, because we're facing the same challenges.
Can I just add one more point? I think it is so critical what Jenny just said. So in the UK, right, if they move out first in terms of commercial deployment, it is not a race to build the first reactor. It is the race to build the 10th. So if you kind of get a head start with the design selected there, which include potentially US designs, UK designs, you're already a significant way down the learning curve and the de-risking curve. So I'd encourage both this body, the larger legislature, to really pay attention and look at where globally government has stepped in to de-risk the financial situation so that you can actually get real deployments off and we can start learning how to build these things at cost.
Thanks. So pretty hot topic in the nuclear conversation is treatment and disposal of waste. Ms. Dunn, I know that the UK has gone through a long process of public engagement on this front. Can you tell us a little bit about what y'all have done and maybe how Texas can learn from your experience?
Yeah, sure. So on waste, the UK wants essentially decommissioning radioactive waste and spent fuel to be something that is built into nuclear design from the very beginning. So policymakers, regulators are speaking to operators, technology vendors about how we make that happen. So it's not sort of an afterthought at the end. It's built into how stuff is designed and deployed in the UK. In the UK, we have something called the Funded Decommissioning Programme, and that ensures that the operators of new nuclear power facilities have secure financing arrangements in place to make sure that waste can be dealt with. Because it's not an inexpensive process. So making sure that they can cover the costs of decommissioning and waste is something that we're looking at. Operators must have a decommissioning and waste management plan, and as I said, a funding arrangement plan in place as well. And that's a funding arrangement that invests kind of over time, and the funds are actually held separate and apart from the operator. And it's outside of government control as well, but it reports quite regularly to the regulator. And then finally in the UK, long term for waste, we have a plan to build a geological disposal facility. I know that has a mixed history in the US, but we're currently in the process to find a site for our GDF. That process was launched in 2018. We are taking something called a consent-based approach to this facility. So in the UK, we actually asked communities to come forward to volunteer to be a potential host community. Because sort of the policy commits us to getting not just sort of the geological requirements for the facility, but also a willing community to host it. Quite amazingly, there are 3 communities in the UK that are in that process, 2 in Cumberland in the northwest of England and 1 in Lincolnshire. So we're sort of moving along and sort of narrowing down between those 3 which ones will host it. The siting process will probably take about 15 to 20 years. So we don't expect sort of the siting in those 3 communities to be finalised until about 2040. And then initial construction will probably take about another 10 years as well. So we do not expect the geological facility to be open until around the early 2050s.
And one of the things I've learned is this waste disposal issue, right? Yucca Mountain didn't happen. My basic understanding of the molten salt technology is it doesn't create that kind of waste byproduct. It's a little different vehicle, and you can speak clearly to it. But decommissioning those, that's a whole new industry. The reclamation of spent fuel rods, the enriched uranium inside the rod is a real thing, I'm told. So as we go through this in Texas, we need to address that on the front end, make it for the cost, so that we're not surprised, right? But if you can truly, it's low level uranium is my basic understanding, if you could pull that from the rods that were supposed to go to Yucca Mountain that are sitting around in places where you'd be shocked, I think, it solves that issue. So here's the thing. If you start down this path and do it correctly, all of the good ideas that we don't know about today will come out. It's just like, why bother if there's no funding, right? So if you start down that path, you're going to have a lot of smart people that's going to step up and wait and say, I've got an idea, and you move this initiative forward. It's the first billion is the hardest billion, right? After that, and usually it's first buck's hardest buck. Well, it's really the first billion in this conversation. But when you get past that, you really do provide solutions. You have a whole new industry dedicated to dealing with the waste conversation. But if you have a reactor on the front end that doesn't produce the waste components that we have challenges with today, you solved a lot of part of that already on the front end. So lots of good things ahead in this if we can just see our way past. It's funny to hear people talk in the legislature. I know some of them will go put $100,000 in the market today only to watch it cut in half overnight. That doesn't seem to bother them. I mean, we've got risk takers, but we've just got to understand that this is one that's worth taking.
I can't believe you got 3 communities to say, yes, we can't get people to take transmission lines.
Well, actually in Texas, there's a lot of people that glow in the dark at night from our energy sources already, so we're open to that. We're kind of good with it. I mean, we have that kind of spirit. We'll try it. You're in the right area, I think, to have these conversations. So, no community wants dangerous waste sitting around, but nobody has a problem with it, at least in West Texas, if it's done properly.
And I will just add on that the communities, the 3 communities in the UK are nuclear towns or nuclear adjacent towns, and they are very familiar with or more familiar with the industry. And I think crucially, they see the economic drivers of nuclear energy. If they're not employed by the nuclear sector, they have family members who are employed by the nuclear sector, and just by nature of nuclear being sort of a long time scale industry, you have generations of families who have been employed in the industry in the UK. So that really helps.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I think if you were going to try to expand or broaden those communities, one of the things we've learned over the past handful of years at the commission is, engaging with the public and informing them if they're educated on these issues. Public sentiment tends to change, especially if there's an economic development framing of the issue. And so I'd imagine, any talk of expansion would require a real coordinated, intentional effort to inform the public about the safety of operations of the unit, of how to effectively dispose of the waste and all those issues. Because I think once people really understand the issues, the fear kind of subsides a little bit.
All right, thanks. Before we move on to questions from the audience real soon, one last thing I got to ask about, Chair Gleeson, the Public Utility Commission's Advanced Nuclear Working Group report came up with some recommendations for lawmakers this session. Could you tell us one or two of the key recommendations and how we can put ourselves on track to making it happen?
Yeah, so there were 6 or 7 recommendations. The majority of them are actually in the Senate bill that was filed by Senator Parker, dealing with having one authority here. I think in his bill, it's administratively attached to the governor's office, having one point of contact for dealing with permitting with the federal entities, with the NRC, then really dealing with supply chain issues. Workforce was also mentioned in there, and then funding, right? And so, like I mentioned, the Texas Energy Fund was done last session. We got $5 billion to help with dispatchable generation last session. Both the Senate and House bills that were filed, budget bills that were filed, include another $5 billion to fulfill the full intent of that legislation. And, again, when I talk to folks, the funding, it always gets back to the funding. All those other issues are somewhat ancillary to how are we going to fund this and de-risk the investment here. And so all of those major aspects of the report, all those recommendations are actually encompassed in Senator Parker's bill. And so we'll see where that discussion goes throughout the session, but you can reference that and get a good understanding of what was in the report.
All right. No more comments on, No more comments on that. If I'm correct, we'll move to questions from the audience. Raise your hands high. Hey, sir.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing kind of where the U.S. and the U.K. are in the permitting process. And I know that France already generates a pretty significant amount of its energy through nuclear. So I'm curious, kind of as one of our, strong allies and trade partners, is there anything that we can learn from France's kind of current infrastructure and regulatory process, that we can apply here?
All right, so France, big nuclear power, what can we learn from them?
You're closer.
Sure. It's a great question. So I will try to relay the answer actually that President Trump gave on the Joe Rogan podcast to this question, which is actually surprising. It's so publicly kind of in the public sphere. So France, for a long time, has been building these reactors, and the way that President Trump described it was they build the same reactor over and over again. It's small and compact. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Right. You have the President of the United States saying that, and let's learn from France and do that. And that was in juxtaposition to what we saw in terms of the Vogtle deployment. So I think that is the main thing is, do what you can to constrain risk from a fabrication side. One of the fascinating things is when you try to build these reactors, right, especially if you don't build them in a factory, if you don't have bricks, those kind of things, is parts show up. And what happens if you're 3/4 of the way through a project and then 2 pipes don't fit together, right? And you have to go through certification, or there's, cement, concrete that, has cracks, those kind of things. If you don't have standardization, that becomes a real challenge. I think France has done a great job in terms of standardizing their approach.
I'll just add a little to that. I got a chance to go tour the whole French nuclear industry, a couple years ago. So their research labs, their fuel processing, reprocessing, power plants, et cetera, disposal sites. Certainly as a nation, France has a larger fraction of their electricity produced from nuclear than we do, but just from a number of reactors, we're still twice the number of France. And so there's things we can learn from them, there's things they can learn from us. One of the things they've done is fewer designs, but if you look at their most recent deployment, they didn't do better than Vogtle, really, in terms of was it on time, was it on budget? No. Still challenges there because they're not small modular, right? They're still trying to build on-site. A skilled workforce you have to relocate to a specific place to build something that's huge over a long period of time. There's just not efficiencies in that. And we can be more efficient by going small modular. You can also avoid the necessity for things like a huge concrete dome by going to advanced reactors where you don't have a pressurized water that you have to protect against a leak. So you can maintain, you don't have a radioactive release. So there's advances to be made in manufacturing process, there's advances to be made in technology choices, and I think France is interested in what we're doing in advanced technology and small modularizing in the same way we're trying to learn from them. And so I think it's back and forth. What I learned from my chemist friends is that if you're an honest scientist, you never say there's anything such as zero, right? And because we can always measure it there. And so there will be some produced. I will say, do you produce the same amount of, do we produce the same amount of waste? The lady's energy source where she's making cow pies and straw and taking it into her house, is that the same as bringing in natural gas to heat your water? I mean, they both produce waste, but the orders of magnitude different, the toxicity, the health effects. So the reactor we're talking about building, the molten salt, also liquid fuel, which I didn't talk about, the different fuel forms. Anytime you have a solid fuel form, you never use all the fuel, and any plutonium or other transuranics you make are part of that goes into the waste stream. So unless you reprocess that fuel like France does, but France only does it one time, and so on the second time they're not reprocessing either. So I'd say there's not a place that continuously reprocesses. And so that anytime you use solid fuel, you end up with a significant amount of those transuranic plutonium and other things that could be used for weapons. You have to store safely for hundreds of thousands of years. Whereas a liquid fuel reactor, you leave the fuel in the reactor until it's used, and so essentially no uranium or plutonium goes into the waste stream. End of life of one reactor, whatever fuel's there, you actually take and put in the fuel for the next one. It's still fine. It's not your fuel rod doesn't go bad and you have to put it in the waste stream. And so I'm not going to say there's zero, but the amount of plutonium that goes in the waste stream will be crazily reduced to negligible amounts.
No, you're spot on. I think our view is at least 3 per site. You have downtime, you're running at 95% plus in terms of your availability, but you do need to replace fuel every once in a while and those kind of things. From our perspective, so it's not only you're deploying those 3, but also kind of one of the unique things about Rolls. I go back to what we're building in Minnesota, which is these gas gen sets that support data centers. So we also build gen sets that support nuclear power. So part of likely the offering that you would see is substantial backup power facilities that could also be used potentially as a transition point. So you field significant gas resources for, let's say, 6 years, 7 years as the SMR gets constructed, put online. Maybe there's an ability to transition those into backup power assets longer term. Right, so we're looking at all the kind of creative solutions, but yes, to your point, likely you'd be deploying, in pods of 3 plus to cover your bases.
I'll just add on that real quick. Obviously, it depends on the needs of the customer, right? I mean, if you're talking about grid level power or building next to a data center, you need gigawatt levels. There are applications where you need much lower levels, and so reducing the requirement for on-site operators. Can one operator handle multiple small modular reactors? Can you monitor them remotely? Advances in technology and instrumentation controls is also there. So there's options, and I would just say the answer to that probably depends upon the customer and the deployment.
Much like anything that we do, you have to engage with the public, right? We're reminded often that the P and PUC stands for public, and we take that seriously. I think you've got to get citizens comfortable with this, right? Chairman Perry and I were talking just before we got up here about, nuclear is really safe. Most people don't realize that, the issues with 3 Mile Island didn't actually result in any people getting harmed. But it's a lot like a plane crash. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it can go really, really badly. And I think any endeavor like this is not going to be successful unless you get public sentiment on the right side of it. So I think as we're talking about partnering with private sector entities, part of that money, part of that effort has to be towards public education. And again, I think like most things, when people are fully informed and any kind of information asymmetry dissipates, people get on board with this, because if everyone wants a reliable grid in Texas, everyone believes in clean power and clean air, and given the load growth in this state that we're projecting, if you want clean air and you want a reliable grid, you have to be in favor of nuclear, because we're not going to wind and solar our way, given the load growth, to a solution in this state. So if you're serious about those issues, I think you have to be serious about nuclear energy in the state.
All right. Sorry, I'm going to quickly put in one question of my own here, because a couple times already we've referenced the alternative fuels. Can we really quickly try to give a few sentences to cover what we mean by alternative fuels? Ms. Dunn, I think you have some comments on that.
Well, I can just talk about briefly what the UK government is doing on advanced fuels. So last year in 2024, the UK government ring-fenced about $372 million to deliver a UK HALEU capability. So that is high-assay, low-enriched uranium. So HALEU for short, by definition, is enriched from between 5% and less than 20%. And it's required for most of the advanced reactors that I think Dr. Towell was mentioning in his presentation, essentially to achieve those smaller designs that get more power per unit of volume. HALEU also allows developers to optimize their systems for longer operating cycles and increase efficiencies. I think there's better fuel utilization as well. So we have ring-fenced $372 million to deliver a HALEU capability. In March of last year, we announced the first tranche of that. Funding awarding around about $243 million to Urenco, who actually have the only commercial scale enrichment facility in the United States. They will deliver a HALEU enrichment capability in the UK on a commercial scale, and we're targeting operations for that in 2031 to come online. And that will be, we think, key to the UK and to our allies in providing a safe and secure advanced fuel and HALEU, because currently Russia are the only country that can enrich HALEU at a commercial scale, at least.
So is there any reciprocity in permitting between the UK and US?
Not yet. I will say that between the DOE and it's both the UK and Canada, there's agreements to share best practices so that the regulatory stringency is similar, that questions being asked of companies is to kind of prove the safety of the designs is similar. It's just a matter of kind of the process in which you do that. But yes, it makes complete sense. We have shared, again, going back to like AUKUS, right? There is mutual design of reactors going on between the UK and the United States. So I think reciprocity is feasible, but it just would take a federal government-led effort to do so.
And just real quick, so Doug, I think what I would say is, talking about best practices is probably a good avenue to start, but I would imagine just as a regulator that we would still want to review everything, because we may have different considerations in this country, or particularly in this state, different from those other jurisdictions. So we would never, I would imagine, want to just fully have reciprocity where if you're licensed one place or permitted, you could just move that over here.
And just to add, I totally agree. I think there are dialogues continuing on best practice, particularly around sort of advancements in technology as well, which is key. But we do have different systems, and I think there is a reason for that, and that is important. So I think keeping sort of those distinct systems while making sort of it not burdensome to share best practice and to deploy in different parts of the globe is really key.
Real fast, between the U.S. and Canada, there's a MOU to allow people to look over each other's shoulder when they're reviewing things. So there are some companies that started licensing in Canada, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and have moved to the U.S. and are trying to take advantage of some of that work already done.
All right, let's get our very last question here for our speakers. Was it hard to get the Abilene community to accept the construction of your reactor there?
I'll just speak personally. I've been a senator for that region for 10 years and representative for 14. This just kind of snuck up. In all fairness, Governor Perry, when he was with Department of Energy, loves Texas, had a contact, and actually Chairman Commissioner Buckingham with GLO now was senator for Abilene, and she called Rick Perry and said, hey, I got this idea going on in Abilene at 16. No building, no real plan, and they had this leading professor that says, I've got an idea. And you know, it's just kind of a West Texas thing, and I keep saying that, but people are willing to go there, I guess. And there was a guy that stepped up and funded the initial study out of his hip pocket, said this is important. This guy was one heck of a salesman, but you could tell he believes what he's saying, and it's easy to migrate to people that know what they're talking about. That's a game changer. And the ACU mission it's not a statement, that's a lifestyle. I mean, they truly want to impact the world for better. And so all of that mixed came through it. I would say, I'm speaking again, being from that area, I was born there, but I bet the community didn't even know that was happening until the building was done, until probably a senator from Lubbock or someone started talking about it publicly. So it wasn't trying to hide it, it was just, you just move forward and do it, and the community there is excited for it. But it was someone that took notice, that called someone in a place of affluence at the DOE at the time, happened to be former governor of Texas. So the stars aligned. That's how it kind of got rolling through.
I'll just say I agree with what was said earlier by the commissioner. You have to educate the public,
Right.
And you have to go out, and so you can scare people with a bumper sticker. I always say you can frighten people with a very short, in 3 seconds I can scare you. But if you want to understand how we're going to bless the world with this technology, I need a few minutes to answer any concern you have. Happy to do that. So I've spoken across Abilene, Kiwanis Club, Rotary Club, City Council, Tuesday morning Methodist Men's Prayer Breakfast. Doesn't matter. If I get invited, I go and I talk. And so we've had lots of town hall engagement. And as a byproduct of that, no one has stood up and said they have concerns or against the project.
And I think I would say it also highlights why events like this are super important, why I think it's great that we were brought together here, because you get kind of a wide array of representation from state leadership to regulatory to industry, where we can share ideas, bring industry in on that. And I think more events like this, getting everyone together, speaking about this publicly, will really help that effort to get everyone comfortable with this.